Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of On the Mic with Mike here on the Steve and Mike Show podcast network. You guys can check all the shows out on our official website, www.steveandmikeshow.com. That is steveandmikeshow.com. And I am pleased to have on this edition of On the Mic with Mike a very talented professional wrestler that is the man behind Hamilton Pro Wrestling Academy, Mr. Rip Impact. Rip, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. I got to say this first and foremost. As a kid growing up on Long Island and pretty much being around the whole Northeast scene from the likes of Jersey All Pro Wrestling, New York Wrestling Connection, which has featured guys like Brian Myers and Brett Matthews, who would later go on to be Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder. You have a lot of great schools in the Creative Pro in the New Jersey and then in the New York area. So I was around a lot of great schools on the Northeast. So I love talking about wrestling schools because they're right at their fingertips wherever you are, whether it be in Canada, whether it be where have you in the U.S. So I wanted to ask you, how does it feel, Hamilton Pro Wrestling Academy, opening your own wrestling school and getting to teach a lot of great students just to how to come into the professional wrestling game and do it the right way, Rick?
It's been awesome. Honestly, it's been like a lifelong goal of mine. I can get into this a little bit more later, but I've been wrestling for the better part of almost 17 years, almost now. So it was something I always wanted to do. It was always something I was pushed towards. Many guys told me I would make a good trainer, like a good coach. So I wanted to push for that. And it's crazy to think now that come September, it'll be 4 years since I opened up the Hamilton Pro Wrestling Academy. And through that time, we've produced probably hundreds of wrestlers or so almost in that time. I'd say about there's 50 or so active guys out there wrestling across the Ontario scene, across Canada, or even to the United States and traveling. So it's a great feeling. It's nothing more rewarding than just watching my guys get noticed or get the reps in or win a championship belt or get their name out there.
I think that's what's cool about it, what I've always appreciated, because, a lot of people talking about getting into pro wrestling, oh, they want to be in this company, that company, but I've always appreciated like the behind the scenes aspect of it, because when you get to train students and you pretty much, you're honing your craft and taking in the knowledge and absorbing it like a sponge, I always appreciated that. Like you see a lot of wrestling schools, and I'm sure as yours does as well, seminars and just having guest people come in and tell about their experience in the business. I think that's what a lot of people miss out is because they're so focused on, I want to get here, I want to get there. Like, you got to realize like some of the best knowledge you can have is just going to wrestling school and doing it the right way. I mean, because you hear about backyard wrestling and it's been documented in many documentaries, but it's like when you do it the right way and just go right in there, it's so worth it.
Absolutely. And I'll never shun upon anyone doing backyard wrestling because you always hear the stories about some of the great successors out there that have done backyard wrestling and started somewhere. I mean, it's somewhere to start, but as you said, there's nothing that compares to going into a school, getting your reps in, learning how to do things properly. And I mean, safety is obviously the number one priority. You're going to get a lot of experience when you're on the road and traveling from show to show and learning. But just getting your reps in and learning the right things early on and developing good habits early on goes a long way in separating yourself, and having those fundamentals in your foundation is so important. And I honestly get to see that with a lot of guys that I'm training these days, and some guys from some other various schools having those same skill sets instilled is great to see. And then you'd be able to nowadays point out some of the guys that don't have those skill sets, that weren't formally trained or didn't train as long. They're still new. They still need that fine tuning. So it's really interesting to see.
It's also unique because when you look at how professional wrestling is, and like for me, I'll be honest with you, like I'm kind of like a very eclectic with it, because I like a lot of different styles. I like that high octane aerial assault, maybe a little lucha libre action, some catch as catch can, and there's so many different styles of wrestling. But I was always drawn to like the William Regals, and I think what it is about nowadays, because everybody sees like the spot fest, like, oh, I got to do a dive here, dive there. I just always appreciated like the systematic dissection, joint manipulation, if you know what I'm saying, just working on the arm, working on the leg, telling a story with the body parts. I mean, I'm not saying that's a lost art now because we see that a lot with like the British strong style and how they're encompassing that with the UK and Canada, but it's just like, god dang, the fundamentals right there.
Absolutely. No, it goes down to it. Like some of the best wrestlers you see out there have had success, guys like Brian Danielson or Daniel Bryan. guy's fundamentals down better than anyone. He outside of what he does his fundamentals, he might have a couple flashy moves, but he's just really, really good at his fundamentals and his foundation. And that's where it goes back to having those abilities. Of course, I believe in all different styles, and with my coaching and training, I'm very hands-on. I'm a very hands-on trainer. I'm involved in every drill or exercise. I get in there and roll with the guys as opposed to just verbally instructing. I'm very hands-on, and I believe it's important to work with the guys' strengths and weaknesses. And I believe it's important to teach a little mixture of all the styles. I don't want to be a wrestling school that just teaches lucha libre or just a wrestling school that teaches North American style. I want to include that British style, the technical wrestling, and I want to include the North American style or the Japanese strong style or the lucha libre high flying style. I think it's important to include all of that.
Of course. And I mean, you know what's very interesting about professional wrestling nowadays? I mean, you look at obviously WWE, Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, the addition of AEW, and the overall independent wrestling circuit. Like, I mean, I remember as a kid being on Long Island going to see Bryan Danielson, who you mentioned, beat James Gibson for the Ring of Honor world title in Long Island, New York for Lake Grove.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just, I love like the indies and just being around that environment. And I mentioned New York Wrestling Connection, but I mean, it's so great now that we have so many different promotions and the overall alternatives to so many companies that are out there. I think it's good for the business, and it's great for a lot of fans to absorb and get into different forms of professional wrestling.
Absolutely. I feel it's strong. I feel very strong, and I feel it's very important to have alternatives. Be it just various indie wrestlings in town, major stream stuff on TV or online, something to be alternative for the mainstream wrestling. And I also think from a trainer aspect, from a trainer point of view, or even just as an active wrestler point of view, obviously I want to keep as busy as I can wrestling everywhere every weekend and traveling. That's one of my favorite parts about wrestling is getting a chance to travel. But having a scale of these independent promotions from smaller shows to bigger shows, it's very important because when I came up on the scene, like I said, 16, 17 years ago, there weren't nearly as many shows in my area, at least. There was, you know what I mean, a show or two every month. Now there's at least a show or two every weekend. So the guys I'm training, I can get them a lot more opportunities and they can get a lot more reps in and get more experience and work with different guys and you mean build their resume up a lot faster. And I think that's a big attribute to a lot of guys and the wrestlers nowadays rising and getting better faster than the guys from 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Agreed. And I look at it like this, like, and I'll put over Canada because, like I said, being a professional wrestling fan, I love different areas and dare I say territories to go to for
Yeah,
professional wrestling. You have, I'll be honest with you, in Canada, you look at the rich history in Canada, like the Bret Harts, the Stampede Wrestlings, Border City Wrestling with Scott D'Amore, the Can-Am Wrestling
absolutely.
School, and what you're doing in Hamilton. I mean, such rich history of wrestling in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wild to see from Calgary, obviously, and the Stampede and the Heart Dungeon, everything they have there, to everything on the West Coast, ECCW and All Star Wrestling in British Columbia, and other projects coming up there. And then the East Coast, too, the Maritimes. I've had to travel down there, and they had Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling, which was ran by Emile Dupree or his son later on, Rene Dupree from La Resistance, and the whole East Coast scene with North Star Wrestling and everything they have there. And honestly, Southern Ontario, where I am right now, in Hamilton, which is right by Toronto and Niagara Falls, is crazy how hot the scene is. Besides this pandemic, obviously, but before this, you know what I mean. I think it was 10 shows or 11 shows for March before the pandemic happened, and like obviously things got canceled, but I was still able to get a whole bunch in, and it's busy every weekend. There's something within a couple hours radius. You know what I mean, sometimes weekends usually have 2, 3 shows, sometimes four. It's not unusual for a Saturday in the middle of the month to have 2 or 3 shows on the same day within the area. So it's busy. It's cool.
Absolutely. And I mean, besides obviously with unfortunate happening with the pandemic, I mean that's great because we get to provide a lot of professional wrestling in the area. And like I mentioned with your school, Hamilton, and like I mentioned BCW, I always like the relationship too because I'm always about united, not divided, if that makes sense. Because I mean, with Impact, you have Border City Wrestling and Can-Am and Smash and a lot of great wrestling territories in Canada. But I also look at it like when you look at the UK and how NXT UK has been kind of like focusing around ICW and progress in that relationship.
Progress.
Yes, and I think it's great to have that overall relationship where pro wrestling get to focus and showcase these talents.
Absolutely. And I think honestly, with companies running here in Toronto, Niagara Falls, Hamilton region, I don't think there's too many that are rival companies. I mean, everywhere you go, there's definitely going to be a rival company and companies that are working against each other. But for the most part, I'd say the bigger percentage of things is companies working together. There's a lot of joint shows and we've worked with Smash Wrestling before doing joint shows and sharing our talent. We've worked with a lot of various companies and like I encourage all my guys to wrestle for every promotion they can as opposed to just working for one or the other. I don't like that choice of you can only wrestle for this company. I think it's very important, like you said. I think it's very good to see most of the companies around here work together. They have that joint camaraderie and a joint end goal where let's just better pro wrestling in general, not just our company or this wrestler or this company. Let's make pro wrestling as a whole the best it can be in Ontario or in Long Island or wherever we're doing it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I remember like the local indies where I live because what's interesting is I grew up, obviously, like I mentioned, Long Island. So East Islip,
Yeah.
for those that are unfamiliar, it's like a suburb of Long Island. So I would go to Deer Park, which was like 10, 15 minutes from my house. They would run NYWC there and the Suffolk Wrestling Alliance. So I mean, it's not unusual for a couple companies to share the same building.
Absolutely, exactly. Yeah, I know. It's probably a little bit away from you, but in Rahway, New Jersey, they had a lot of stuff with Jersey All Pro, and later on, various companies ran that one venue there that Jersey All Pro ran. I remember Dragon Gate USA ran a show there that I was fortunate to wrestle on, and I've done a little bit of stuff up that way in the New Jersey scene a little bit, and out that way, I'm familiar with some of the guys in the New England area. We have to work with them down this way or a little bit out that way, and yeah, it's not unusual here too for several promotions to necessarily run not only the same city but often the same venue. Yeah.
That's the thing too. I mean, you mentioned like the New England area. I mean, Northeast Championship Wrestling, Sheldon Goldberg's promotion.
Yep.
I remember NWA Shockwave. Rest in peace to
Yep.
Billy Firehawk. So I mean, yeah, man, that's really going the way, and that's the grind. That's the travel right there, Rip.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's cool to, and again, that's something like I'm so excited about that. Looking forward to the future and just currently and looking at the past, the places I've got to travel to, and the people I've got to meet and the things I've got to see. It's crazy to think to me that I was like a teenager kid that I was like, I get to wrestle, I get to travel these places, I get to, you know what I mean, drive here, or get flown here, or fly here, or you know what I mean, do these tours of the northern Canada. You hear the stories about the northern death tours, or the northern hell tours, and do those and experience all of that. It's really cool to think about.
And that's the thing with you. Like, I'll be honest, we got to give credit to Ernie Moore. We got to talk about Reggie Marley. The greats that you were trained by in the Ultimo Dragons dojo. And here's the thing: the
Yep.
first time I actually remember hearing about the Ultimo Dragons dojo was actually Chris Jericho's podcast. Because as soon as he had Ultimo Dragon on, I think at WCW, and I believe it was War in Japan, right? If I got that
Yeah,
correctly, Wrestling
yeah,
Romance. Okay,
yeah. I love
so
that match.
it's nice. So I remember him talking about that, and I'm like, God dang, that's cool because you think of Ultimo Dragon, you think of the matches with Jericho, you think of the Rey Mysterio feud in
Yeah,
WCW. I can say this. I mean, say what you will about the WWE run, but for me as like an 11, 12-year-old kid, I got to see him debut against Shannon Moore and MSG and be at WrestleMania 20. Ultimo Dragon is one of those legendary figures in professional wrestling.
he's honestly iconic. He's legendary, as you put it, and I've been very fortunate, like you said, to train with these guys. Like Reggie Marley is a great local guy that I got to soak in a lot from, and Ernie Moore had the chance to work with Vince Senior back in the WWF days, and you know what I mean, even though Ernie is up there in age, the knowledge he passed on, just the stuff he showed me in my early ages of training was invaluable. And I always say this about Ernie. Um, I always say this line that Ernie made me not only the wrestler I am today, but Ernie made me the man I am today. He went beyond coaching me in ring. He helped, you mean like me become the man I am today, like instill good morals and just like a positive attitude, and that has gone a long way. And then furthering my training, yeah, meeting Ultimo Dragon at UWA Hardcore in Toronto, which was one of my home promotions back in like 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8. They got to bring in Ultimo Dragon and later on some of his students, and they got to bring in Okada, and you know what I mean, like one of the greatest wrestlers of all time now. You got to bring on all these guys, and through that connection, that sent me down to Mexico, and I got to train at the Ultimo Dragon Dojo with Ultimo and Skyda, Negro Novara, Archangel, and then years later training in Texas with Rudy Boy Gonzalez. I think all these factors of me training at multiple places with literally legends helped me become the trainer I am today. Instead of just training with one person and then passing on those things, I think attending, like you said earlier, dozens and dozens of seminars and training at multiple schools with different people has helped me become the trainer I am today and pass my knowledge on to the next generation.
And that's the thing. I mean, you're talking about legends there. And I think Rudy Boy Gonzalez, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, again, this
Yeah.
is a bit before my time. I'm 28, but knowing the history of wrestling, I believe he was trained by, what's his Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, right?
Yeah. That's as far as I know, that is correct. And Rude Boy's also got the claim of the Texas Wrestling Academy, working with Shawn Michaels and getting him back in shape. And him and Rudy Boy and Shawn, you mean they helped trained Brian Kendrick, Paul London, Brian Danielson. You mean so many others came out of that Texas Wrestling Academy in San Antonio way, Texas, and out that way. So it's been really cool to work on stuff and train with him for a bit that I did down there. So that was a great experience.
Of course. And talking about Texas for a second, I think if I remember correctly, Lance Hoyt, I think, came around there, who's now in
Yeah,
AEW with Nick Roberts.
yeah,
Yes. So
yeah.
you
You're
look
correct.
at Texas. Yeah, you look at Texas, man. I mean, world class championship wrestling. You think about the Von Erichs. You think about the Freebirds. I mean, Texas again, one of the most richest, territories. Dare I say, their states in regards to
Yeah,
professional
yeah,
wrestling. And I think
yeah.
Sabotage is also there as well. Thunder Rosa's promotion. I mean, the first ever all female, company there. So
Yeah.
Texas is a hotbed.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I really gravitated toward Texas because some of the places I stayed in Texas, San Antonio and Austin, Texas and stuff, they remind me of the area that I'm from. Not only within the wrestling world, but in like the general like music and arts world in general. Like Hamilton's got a pretty rich history of its art scene. We do like a art crawl or a music crawl every month downtown Hamilton. We do like wrestling shows and different things. And Austin's the same way. Austin, Texas is very similar. They're known for their music history and their background arts and different things. So it's really cool to see the cities, across states or countries that are similar in a way and just meet different people, see different things. Again, that's one of my favorite parts of wrestling is the fact I got to travel.
That's the thing too, man. And I mean, when you look about, like you mentioned, your wrestling school as well, like you guys could do so many events from charity events. I mean, I remember Creative Pro just did an event not too long ago for like birthday parties and stuff. So you get to have a wide assortment, dare I say, a wide array of stuff you could do with your shows that not just for professional wrestling fans, but also get to interact with the people for special occasions.
Absolutely, and that's awesome that you mentioned that. Like every year around Christmas and over the holidays, we always do a giant food drive and toy drive show where all the fans, even if they can bring some canned goods or foods, non-perishable foods, and bring some toys. And I work with a couple charities where we donate all the food afterwards to a giant food bank. We donate all the toys to kids in the city, and we reach out like very like involved with the community and like the local community and working with them with the food drives and toy drives. And then the other avenue of like, yeah, we've done birthday parties at the Wrestling Academy, which is really cool. Having like, kids in there and showing them the basics or putting on live matches at the academy for the kids. And then like, me making them a wrestling cake and stuff and doing birthday parties. It's really cool. I wish I had like I mean, how cool would it have been when you were, 10 years old or whatever, if you're a wrestling fan, then to be able to go see wrestlers like up close at a wrestling school and have a birthday there. It's really cool to be able to give that back and do that.
Oh, hell yeah. And I mean, I'll be honest with you. I was late to the game. 10 years old was actually when I started watching wrestling in 2002. Like, obviously, I knew about wrestling,
Myself
but
as well. I started
nice.
by watching. I mean, you always hear stories of guys starting watching wrestling when they're 4 or 5, 6 years old. I was late to the game as well. I started really getting into it when I was about 9, 10 years old as well.
Oh,
Um,
damn.
when I got
Yeah,
into it,
that's
yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like your parents tried to steer you away, but I knew my dad was a big professional wrestling fan, and I kind of bugged him
Yeah,
about it. But he would always tell me to get out of the room, which was funny. But after a while, like about Hulk Hogan and all these, and The
of
Rock, of
course.
course, and so many, but you don't watch it. And I started watching it, and obviously this is around the time when Cena, Batista, Randy Orton, and Brock Lesnar are on the come up. So it's very interesting just to see over the many years, my God's sake, since 2002 to now, just how wrestling has evolved
Almost 20
and
years.
changed. I know, right? It's amazing just to see how everything's evolved and changed and to see everything that's at your fingertips now with the addition of social media. But I mean, god dang, man, it's absolutely amazing to see how wrestling as far as come from the 80s, 90s into present.
It's really amazing. You see the generations, the eras. Like you hear about the '80s era, and then like the '90s Attitude era, and then the Ruthless Aggression era, and you mean the current day and the product that we have, and you see the evolution, and you see it going up and down and up and down, and it's really cool to watch wrestling back from from the past, like from the early 2000s, the early '90s to the '80s, and before, and to watch the current project. Um, I have a lot of my students right now during this off time. They've gone back and they've been watching Raw and SmackDown, and even the lower card shows. Like I love watching Velocity or Sunday Night Heat from like 2002, 2003 up to five. That era of wrestling was some really good stuff with the undercard talents. I really enjoy watching a lot of stuff like that with like the Dean Malenkos and the S.A. Rios, and I mean a lot of those guys you see, and the Smackdowns with like Edge and Eddie, you know what I mean, and so many good talents during that time. It's wild watching that. I have a lot of my students right now during this off time watching anything from 2002 or 2001 up to 2004 or five, Raws and Smackdowns and stuff. It's a great era to watch.
Oh, you said it right there. I'll be honest. As soon as you said Velocity from 2002, there was a match I remember on there. Young Randy Orton on the Upstart taking on Billy
Yeah,
Kidman, which was actually not a bad match. And I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
watching those back, it's amazing just to see. And like you mentioned, S.A. Rios, there was the Metals and Jacks where Hurricane fought
Yeah,
AJ
yeah,
Styles and S.A. Rios and Samoa Joe.
yeah,
Like, so many talents.
yeah. So completely agree. And you mentioned earlier watching Daniel Bryan, Brian Anderson, and Jamie Noble or James
Yep.
Gibson. I remember a match on Velocity. It was Jamie Noble and Canyon. It was just a match on Velocity, and there's so many different things in that match. I've gone back and watched that match probably 4 or 5 times just on Velocity. You can find it on YouTube, and it's such a good match for their time. I mean, the early 2000s, and it's really good to see those guys get those opportunities, and it's just cool to watch.
All right, well, funny story I'll mention. I'm actually glad that you mentioned that because I know which match you're talking about. So I remember like when 2013 came around and they were doing the build for SummerSlam with Daniel Bryan to go against John Cena, right? And I'm like, I remember being 11 years old watching the Basic Thugonomics, Dr. Thugonomics fight him on an
Yeah,
episode of Velocity. And it's just amazing to see like that 10-year time frame. And I also remember there was a match on Heat. This was before I went to a Ring of Honor show in Long Island. Danny Basham fought a young Nigel McGuinness, and then everybody was chanting Danny Basham at him at the following Ring of Honor show.
amazing. I love it. I love stuff like that.
Me too, and
And
that's the thing.
the Ring of Honor stuff in the early 2000s was awesome as well. Like I was fortunate enough to get into Ring of Honor pretty much early when they first started, like the era of honor begins and like the round robin challenges and the first couple of shows. To catch that stuff early on, it was incredible to watch and be a fan of that. And then later on, just a couple of years later, work with guys from Ring of Honor, wrestle the Christopher Daniels, wrestle the AJ Styles, and then end up wrestling for Ring of Honor eventually later on, right? It's really cool to see because I've always gravitated towards that company.
that was actually gonna be my segue. I'm actually glad that you brought that up because you're taking on guys like AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels. And when you think like going back to 2005, one of the best matches ever, X Division title, Unbreakable, Styles, Daniels, and Joe, one of the best main events ever for TNA at the time. For you in Ring of Honor, you're wrestling those guys. I did see the match with you, Eric Martin, and Brian Johnson against the Shinobi Shadow Squad.
Oh,
Like for
yeah.
you, so for you, you're in a company with Ring of Honor, such prestige wrestling. You see the women's division, given the girls' time from Shimmer being another great organization that is. The company from when I started getting into it in 2005 to what it is now, you see a lot of great talents in the women's division prominently, and you get to see a lot of veterans there that a lot of people can learn from. So Ring of Honor, possibly, if not, one of the best professional wrestling and companies to go to.
Absolutely. I've always enjoyed any experience I've had with Ring of Honor. I think the first time I wrestled for Ring of Honor probably would have been 2007, maybe. It sounds right. It sounds right. So it's crazy to think. It's one of the first times I came to Toronto, though, and it was a crazy weekend because they did a double shot, and I wrestled on both shows, just the pre-show match, so it wasn't taped or anything. But I had some stand-up matches that I was able to come back the next day, and it's wild sharing the locker room with some of those guys. Many of which I've met before at companies like my home promotion at the time was very Hardcore, so I got to get familiar with Kevin Steen and El Generico and Tyler Black and all those guys at the time. I got to come like some acquaintances and friends with those guys, but just wrestling on that stage in front of those crowds and knowing the history of Ring of Honor at the time and seeing what it became later on was incredible. And the opportunities there helped me get other opportunities. And when local shows would bring in like a name guy like Christopher Daniels or AJ Styles, it's very rewarding and cool that they picked me as the guy to work with those guys. And obviously that was awesome, like wrestling Christopher Daniels, who, in my opinion, is one of the best well-rounded wrestlers of all time. Wrestling him literally in my hometown of Hamilton for my like home company where I trained at my school was just really cool. And then a few days later, wrestling AJ Styles in Toronto in a tag match was another cool experience, right? Especially, like you said, watching them do that stuff on Impact or TNA at the time. It's just really cool to mix it up with those guys. And all the times later on with Ring of Honor were really, really cool opportunities. One of my favorite moments I got to be privileged to do was wrestle with Tommaso Ciampa at Ring of Honor. That was actually taped for TV, which was really cool. It was a really cool time. He was just coming back from an injury, and that was one of his first matches back. And they were setting up a program with Tommaso. It was right before Final Battle, so he's going into some stuff. So it was really cool to have that match. You know what I mean? And to be able to look back on that, you know what I mean, have footage of that because it was taped. When some of my other matches weren't, they were either pre-show or dark matches, so they were there for the live audience, but never always being able to look back at them. So it's really cool opportunities.
It's one of those things where, and you mentioned guys like Styles and Daniels, and I'll mention Tyler Black, Seth Rollins for a second before I get to Ciampa. You look at Seth Rollins, like, well, what you're doing with your wrestling school. Seth is another one who has his own wrestling school now, which is awesome to give back to the fans and to give back to young wrestlers.
Yeah, the Black and the Brave, I think it is, right? Yeah, it's Seth Rollins and Merrick Brave, the wrestling school. Yeah, and I've had a couple of my guys that train with me, train with a couple other guys, or meet up at shows in the States and stuff like that. I've heard really good things about his school down that way, and I can only imagine them being great guys as well.
And that's the thing. And you mentioned Tommaso Ciampa as well. Like for me, with him and Gargano, the DIY, what they did in NXT, what he's done in Ring of Honor, I love it. And then I got to ask you, with today's current product, we have Killer Cross now coming in. It looks like they're doing something with him and Ciampa. That's going to be very good because Killer Cross from AAA, Lucha, Impact, he's another one that has the minds and he's great presence about him and overall character.
Absolutely, it's very exciting to see what's to come. You know what I mean? Like you said, I was a huge fan of all the DIY stuff with Gargano and Ciampa as a tag team, then feuding, then coming back to it, and then feuding again recently with the roles switched. I've enjoyed all of that, and I'm familiar with Killer Cross. Obviously, I think you'd be under a rock if you weren't. But I've also haven't dived into him too much, so I'm actually really excited to dive into seeing what he brings to the table because I know he's going to bring everything to the table, and it's going to be very exciting to watch because he seems like an awesome talent. So I'm very excited for it.
And another one I have to mention is because these are guys I know you've been in there and obviously are familiar with, like guys like Drew Gulak who are finally getting that opportunity. What he's doing, that match with Daniel Bryan, my God, that they had. Elimination Chamber was amazing. And then you see Michael Elgin, who's now doing his thing in the Impact World Heavyweight Championship scene and from Ring of Honor New Japan as well.
Yeah.
Two guys that you've got to work with and just seeing like their rise is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's really awesome seeing those guys. Both those guys. It's hilarious. It's funny that you just mentioned Elgin. I literally just got tagged in a match where it was myself versus Michael Elgin from 2006. So I had only been wrestling for a couple of years at the time. Elgin had just been wrestling for a year, probably a couple of years at the time as well, because we started around the same time. And just watching a match from him and I from 2006 last night, and now talking about it, it's crazy to me. And yeah, to see everything he's done with his success in Ring of Honor and his traveling in New Japan, and I mean, recently Impact and everything, it's awesome to see him succeed the way he has. Speaking of Michael Elgin as well, it wasn't that long ago, just a couple months ago, we had Michael Elgin down at the Hamilton Pro Wrestling Academy for a seminar. We've been fortunate to have Elgin for a seminar. We've been fortunate enough to have Joe Hendry, Kikitaro. We've had Joey Legend, who's from Germany, who's originally from Ontario, who's traveled around, who was just Joe for WWF back in the days. He's come down to the seminar. He's come down to the seminars at the school 3 or 4 times now. He's a guy that anytime he's in the area, we'll bring him in for a seminar. So we've had a handful of guys in for seminars that you've talked about. It's been really cool having all those guys in. But Elgin is just one of those guys that has like a wrestling brain and just stands out. So I look forward to any time I get to wrestle him. I probably wrestled Elgin 30 or 40 times over all the years, just coming up together at the same time. And just as I said, watching a match with myself and Elgin last night from 14 years ago is crazy to think about. And it's really neat. And Drew Gulak is one of the best. Like you said, him and Daniel Bryan at Elimination Chamber was awesome to see. It's just incredible to see him get like his dues. And it was just a fantastic match. And then even Drew Gulak versus Cesaro on the WrestleMania pre-show or whatever was awesome to see as well, even though it was only 6 or 7 minutes. It was a great match. And I'm very lucky and fortunate to have been able to wrestle Drew Gulak a couple times. And he's one of the best. And he's just a classy stand-up guy too. Anytime I've got to see him later in the years, I did a little bit of extra work and a tryout with WWE when they came to Toronto a couple of times, and Drew Gulak was there, and it was always so friendly to talk to and talk to him and see him and pick his mind a little bit in catering and stuff. He was always awesome to talk to.
And that's the thing, like you mentioned, being an extra work and doing like you mentioned Cesaro and Drew Gulak 6 or 7 minutes. But I gotta say, you make the most out of your time, whether you're an extra doing the job and just pretty much helping that superstar, get over with their overall character and their abilities, and just telling that story. I think whatever time you have, you make most of the time, and you make the most out of that opportunity. Because I know the term jobber gets thrown around, but I don't look at it like that. I mean, it's an opportunity. I'm on TV. I'm doing extra work. I'm getting my name and my exposure out there. So it's like because a lot of people, if you notice, they downgrade that and degrade it, but I'm like, it's actually not. It's actually cool. It's great for your name and your overall brand and the presentation.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it used to be kind of looked down and talked down as the term jobber and stuff. I think people are evolving from that a little bit more and respecting like the enhancement talents. I've been in that position a lot. I've been on both ends of the boats. I've been, main eventing several shows and winning championships and stuff. But I've also been even the lower level card guy. I've been kicking off shows. I've been, big fish in a small pond, and I've been, a big fish in a large pond before, or a small fish in a large pond. And I like all roles. I think it's important. A couple of wrestling promoters, not just one, but a couple of them describe me as a utility wrestler. And that's the way I like to compare, if I can compliment Christopher Daniels once again. He's someone that can wrestle anyone and have a good match. And I try my hardest to wrestle anyone and be able to pull a good match out of anyone. If they're been wrestling for 20 years, if they've been wrestling for 10 years, or if they've been wrestling for 10 months, I try to bring the best out of everyone, highlight their strengths, hide any weaknesses they have, work with them if they're, a cruiserweight, or work with them if they're like a super heavyweight. And I try really hard to do that. And I think going back to like what you said about enhancement talent, like working on those things, I've I've had the chance to do that a fair bit with some top talent, and I've always treasured the experience. I've never looked down, and everyone that have seen me on TV or doing experiences like that have really actually appreciated what I did, and like they knew what my role was. You know what I mean? I was there as an opportunity, which I appreciated, but I was also there not only to get opportunity and spread my brand, but I know my job and my role was also to bring that other guy up to another level and enhance his abilities. And my role was to make him look as good as I could. And I take pride in that.
Exactly. And I think it just owns and you get to apply your craft and obviously getting that opportunity, like I mentioned before, but you're taking pride in helping people. And that's what it's about. I mentioned Unite Not Divided, but if you're helping your opponent, telling the story, doing what needs to be done for said angle, said matchup to, enhance, like to use that word, and just pretty much go forward with and just, accentuate and exude said talent. I mean, you're doing your job and you're applying that craft.
Absolutely agree.
Another thing I got to mention to you is a couple final things because you mentioned super heavyweight. I believe you got a chance to work with the late great King Kong Bundy as well.
Yes, yes. You did your homework. You've done your homework. Excellent. Yeah, that was really fun. That was early in my career, obviously. But yeah, I got the chance to work with King Kong Bundy at a local show, which was a ton of fun. Again, he was a class act as well. Super nice guy. The match was only a few minutes long, but our job, again, the job was to make him look as good as he can, as powerful as he could. But and we did that no problem. But like he was very giving as well. He wanted us to get everything we could in, and even after the match, he was almost apologetic that he's like, I wish we could have done more. And it's like, we did what we had to do, man. Thank you for the opportunity. So it was really cool to wrestle guys like King Kong Bundy and like other old time legends. I've had the chance to share locker rooms, and I've had the chance to wrestle Bushwhacker Luke dozens of times, and he's just one of my favorite guys. Just touring with him, and even at his age, he's still wrestling. He's still keeping busy. It's crazy. It's crazy to me, and I hope one day maybe I'll be that same guy like Bushwhacker Luke. You know, me in my 60s, or he might even be 70 now. I'm not sure, but he's up there in age and still wrestling and still making appearances. It's just it's awesome.
I was about to say that, yeah, he's like in his 60s going on 70s, but Bushwhacker Luke can still go. And in regards to King Kong Bundy, I'll be honest with you, one of my favorite pitchers. So as a 13-year-old kid, NYWC, I believe it was him and a wrestler by the name of Spider against Stockade. No, it was him and, it was Spider and Tito Santana against Stockade and King Kong Bundy. And getting to take pictures with Tito Santana, and I have a photo of me, King Kong Bundy, like choking me, doing the old King Kong Bundy choke. I love that because SD Jones, he got to wrestle SD Jones. I'm talking about The Undertaker, Tito Santana, El Matador, Shawn Michaels, like legends.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's really cool. And it's so cool sharing locker rooms these odd times with legends. Like the early Ring of Honor shows, they had Bret Hart there for one day and Ric Flair the next day. And just, literally having a chance to have a 10-minute conversation with Bret Hart is something I'll never forget, right? Or just any of these legends at any times. Chinlock Wrestling, which is a local promotion here that does charity wrestling shows every year. They do a giant fundraiser every December, and they did huge events, and they always bring in guys. And last year they had Ricky the Dragon Steamboat down, and just talking to him in the back, and then everyone crowding around him. He just did like a impromptu hour seminar in the back for everyone, just because he felt like he was passionate. Like he still had that passion, and he just got to share his knowledge with everyone. And it was just awesome. Those moments like that, you'll never forget.
I think one other opponent before I have you promote the social media and the whole nine here, Rip, is I got to say this to you. Like, I've seen you do stuff with Corey Stone, Mr. Atlantis, watching that back. And I believe you got to work with Channing Decker, who's done a lot of great work in Canada. He did some Impact Twitch shows. I wanted to ask you about those guys because those guys are very prominent.
Yeah, definitely. Decker's great. He's very involved with his Greektown wrestling promotion, and his brother Trent Gibson is awesome as well. They're the tag team fraternity. I've got to see them get some awesome opportunities, and since Decker's kind of broke out on his own recently, he's done really good things traveling to Big Japan, and he's been on like a hardcore kick, so he's been wrestling some ECW legends from Sabu to anyone else that he's got to work with over the years. It's really awesome seeing Decker. And then, all guys like Corey Stone. He was the first ever Hamilton Pro Wrestling champion for the shows that I run. He had probably, in my opinion, I think looking at the records, probably the longest title run in local history. He was the first ever Hamilton Pro Wrestling champion, and he held the HPW championship for 441 days. So it was a very lengthy run, only to lose it to one of my other prize students, Mike Forte. And yeah, I'll just take a second to talk about some of those guys like Forte, Corey Stone, Evan Greenaway, Travis Moore, Tyler Errol, BMD, Brett Michael David, even Dylan Daniels, who only wrestled for a short little while, but he had a good run, and guys like Jake Jones. All these guys are guys that I've got to train, and now it's awesome seeing guys like BMD wrestle in the States and get opportunities to win championships, and other guys like Corey Stone and Evan and Forte and win belts and Tyler Arrow, and it's just awesome seeing them break out. So it's really cool working with all those guys, and any chance I get in the ring to wrestle one of them, I mean, it's my goal. I always told myself, and maybe I'll kick myself afterwards for this, everyone that I've trained at some point, I want to have a match on a show with. So now I have 40 or 50 active wrestlers out there on shows. I've wrestled probably, I'd say, a quarter of them already. So I still have a good, 75%, maybe 50% more to still wrestle on shows. So I got a lot more matches still in me to work with all these guys. So there's a lot of promising talents with the names I just mentioned.
Of course, and I think as a trainer, you want to take on your students, the whole teacher-student dynamic. And I mean, I mentioned guys like Corey Stone, Mr. Atlantis, and that matchup. I think with you, Rip, the sky is the limit. And I'm going to tell you right now, I truly wish you nothing but continued success and happiness as well, because from behind the scenes, you're very welcome. From behind the scenes and from in the ring, you have a lot to offer with your mind and your overall craft, like we mentioned, to reiterate that point. But for you, the segue to this question is, as a guy who's done things behind the scenes with the training aspect and coaching and overall mentoring and being in that ring, what advice would you give to wrestlers who are, on the come up and want to get into professional wrestling and pursue the overall dream and the overall career that is professional wrestling?
Well, I get asked that question for a bit, and I always think about it in the sense that if you're brand new, you've never stepped in a ring before, and you want to pursue wrestling, my biggest advice is honestly just to at least give it a go. Try your hardest and give it a fair shot. Running the wrestling school, I've seen people come and go. I've seen people sign up. They last a week, they last a class, and then they never come back. I've seen guys last a month or two, and I've seen guys I've been training for over 3 years now. They started from the start, and they're still training with me, still going. One of the biggest advices I can say for someone who's just starting up is to always give it a fair shot. You never want to wonder what if. You never want to have any regrets. You don't want to be, 40, 50 years old or whatever, and look back and say, hey, I wish I tried pro wrestling. I wish I gave it a try. I have guys all ages. I got guys I'm training that are 16, 17, 18 years old. And most of my guys are in their 20s or early 30s. But I'm also training a couple of guys in their 40s. Guys that are, conventionally a little bit older, are still training with me and starting at older age because they want to give it a go. So my biggest advice is anyone, never wonder what if. Find a reputable wrestling school in your area and get trained properly and give it a go. If you train for a month and you feel you can't take it or it's challenging or your body can't take it, your trainer feels it's too hard for you, then maybe it's not for you and you can go back to watching it. But you'll always know at least you gave it a try, as opposed to always wondering what if and just being a fan on the sidelines. So I always encourage people to try it. For wrestlers actively going, I think it's important when you're starting off to keep training. I always feel that training never stops. You can always keep training, even if you just drop into a wrestling school every once in a while to stay sharp. And I think it's very important to get your reps in. I was a big advocate of keeping busy with wrestling. I went to every show I could, constantly paying my dues, even setting up rings taken down, and wrestling on any opportunity I could, getting my reps in. That's helped me become the wrestler I am today, helped me become the trainer I am today, and constantly getting matches in. Like, it's not unusual for me to have 100+ matches every year. You know what I mean? For most of my career. So I've had a lot of matches. I think a lot of my guys are trying to do that as well. So I think it's very important. That's probably my best advice I could give.
Beautifully said, Mr. Rip Impact. And I got to say this about you before I have you promote the social media. The Overture is here. Anytime you want to come back on the show, I'd love to have you. It's really been a pleasure just to pick your brain and shoot the breeze on pro wrestling with you today. So I thank you, sir.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me. It's been excellent, and definitely shoot me a message sometime, and we'll check in again. Hopefully, do this down the road again because I had a lot of fun.
Absolutely. The feeling is mutual. And Mr. Rip Impact, please promote the Facebook, the Twitter, Instagram, where people can follow your school and yourself. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So you can follow Hamilton Pro Wrestling Academy, which is my wrestling school here in Hamilton, Ontario. You can follow us at Hamilton Pro Wrestling on Facebook, Hamilton Pro Wrestling on Instagram, Hamilton Pro Wrestling on YouTube, and Ham Pro Wrestling on Twitter. You can follow me personally as Rip Impact on Facebook. I have a page there, or my personal page. I also can be followed as Rip Impact on Twitter and Rip Impact on Instagram.
Beautiful. Links will be in the description below here on the SoundCloud, and this will be on the Wrestling with Wrestling YouTube channel very soon. And I just want to say, Rip, from whether your team with Matt Bison, from whether you've worked with a lot of people, had a great career, Youth Unleashed, you've done a lot of great work. I just wanted to give some love to Matt Bison as well. So you've done a lot of great work. And I just got to say this. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Do you have any final words for the fans that have been supporting Rip Impact since day one?
I just want to say genuine thank you. I've literally seen new fans every show, and I've seen lifelong fans. Give a shout out to the Chant Monkeys, which are lifelong fans in the Ontario area that have been literally watching me wrestle since 2003 or 2004. They've been watching wrestling for a long time in the area, and seeing those guys at shows still to this day is it's awesome. And I just genuinely want to thank you for your time and for the podcast interview. And I want to thank everyone that's ever bought a T-shirt, a DVD, you made 8x10, a ticket for a show, or come see me and cheer me on, or watch one of my matches online. I genuinely do appreciate it. I'm looking forward to keeping busy during this time, still training when I can, solo training in the ring, or doing what I can, and coming back and entertaining all the fans soon enough.
For Rip Impact, my name is Mike Larkin. Thank you guys so much for listening to another edition of On the Mic with Mike. I will be back in the next episode. Mr. Rip Impact, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.